Now, I believe we need to research policy, particularly in the substance use field, but we really do need to have a justification for it. And we need to have justifications for implementing new substance use policies. So we're going to talk about some very, very basic survey strategies, or at least ways to discuss or ways to elicit information and gather information about different substance use disorders and kind of the basics of the very, very basics of epidemiology. So, when epidemiology of substance use, which was a separate course, basically works hand in hand with implementing and researching policy effects in the substance use fields. So, the epidemiology of drug use, basically, we're asking who is using what, where, and when. We also want to know how the substance is being used. Is it being smoked? Is it being snorted? Is it being injected? Is it being vaporized, which is a relatively new occurrence for some substances. So the epidemiology will tell us this. The epidemiology will also tell us what are the consequences of this substance use. What are the harms associated with substance use? Not only what are they, but how impactful are they, how often do they occur, and how much impact do they have ultimately on things like mortality and life expectancy and quality of life and disability status. Now, in this course, in the things that substance use epidemiology covers is basically any substance that could be used to, well, essentially change a mental state, to get high, right? So we have legal substances like alcohol and tobacco, again, marijuana in some states and countries. We have prescription opioids, which can be used for illegal purposes. We have illicit opioids, the opiates like heroin. And then we have the other substances which we typically consider illegal drugs, like cocaine and amphetamines and hallucinogens. And we'll try to touch upon all of these at least once throughout this term, throughout the course. But all of these are covered by some policy out there in one way, shape, or form. Now, the information to conduct substance use epidemiology is essentially collected in three main ways. Now, implementation of these different ways can vary based on whether it's a surveillance system or a cohort study or an experimental trial, which we won't get into here. But these are basically the main ways we collect the direct information about how much someone is using some substance, when, where, how, etc. The main way we do it is through self-report. We simply ask them. We may ask them directly. We may ask them through a survey. So you see questions on the screen about alcohol use. So we'll basically ask them to categorize themselves, when they used, how much they used, how often they use. We may ask them questions in terms of quantity or who they use with or the locations of where they use. But regardless of what questions we ask, we're asking them to report on their own behaviors. And there are some drawbacks to that. They may, hopefully they are completely honest, but they may not be. There could be some bias in there, saying sometimes they tell us what we want to hear. Sometimes they tell us things because other people in the room, so they kind of want to look cool in front of their friends, or maybe they don't want to say as much because they're family members or parents or guardians nearby. So self-report is a very important tool in addiction science, but it is also something that is not perfect because we have no way to verify the information that they're telling us. We do use records. Vital statistics records, such as death certificates, often will list, they will list the cause of death, and they'll often include substance-related causes of death, again, whether it's tobacco or alcohol or another substance if someone overdosed. We'll use medical records as well. Now, these aren't as objective as we would like to think. There is some subjectivity to medical records and death certificates, but they do tend to be a little bit better in terms of quality of data than self-report, as long as they're complete. And again, there are issues with medical records and death certificates that I would love to talk about you outside of this lecture. But they are more objective than self-report, and they're less prone to subjectivity on the part of the person actually using the substance than self-reported information. And finally, when we have the resources, and I stress that because this is a very resource-intensive way to collect data, we can actually chemically test people for their substance use. We can take saliva samples, we can do breath tests, we can take blood samples. And we can test how much drugs, essentially, how much substances or the metabolites of these substances are still in their system. Now, this will depend on when they last used, if they've ever used, how much they used in terms of quantity, but this will give us a very objective measure that completely gets around the subjective nature of self-report in some of these records to determine how many people are using a particular substance and how much. So we have self-report using existing records, as well as chemical testing that we use to collect information on the epidemiology and the consequences of substance use.